Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Advocacy Hour. I am Malynda, your co-host, and I'm joined by Miss Rebecca Thomas. Rebecca, how are you today?
Hello, I'm doing so well. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there. I'm still
Good.
reeling from Dr. Jesus. Um,
You're laughing again, but you had stopped laughing for a minute. But I know you were really enjoying those, and I was enjoying you enjoying them.
Thank you. We all needed a little bit of joy.
Yes.
It's unfortunate, and I was also saying to my husband, I was like, we're going to see so many quote unquote doctor costumes for Halloween this year, and it's
Oh
going to
yeah.
be very, very funny.
The people who do that though, it's going to make it very obvious, like who's who, right?
And I can't wait. And I can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're continuing our conversation about intersectionality, and I loved our last conversation with Janae Lewis from Faith in the Public Life, and today we're going to
Yes.
be joined by Rabbi Joel Simonds, who is the executive director of the Jewish Center for Justice. And we've talked about intersectionality as a concept, but we're going to really talking about what it looks like in action. And for you, Rebecca, because I know that you just taught a course on Buddhism, and I know that you have explored a lot of different faiths just in your work. You're now a reverend. Should I be calling you Rev? I'm gonna start calling you Rev, Rebecca.
Yeah.
But what does intersectionality in practice look like to you?
Yeah. So talking about like the way we do interfaith work and why that matters to me and how I kind of find my place in that is that I really do believe in this idea of perennialism, which really just means that there is a divine truth at the core of all major religions. And to separate ourselves into these smaller groups and then say that my group should be responsible for this, like, doesn't make sense to my brain. It's like, I feel like I should be doing good in the world. There are other people that are not from the same faith tradition, but why would I use faith tradition to determine who I can work with to do good in the world? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So that's where I find myself in this like intersection and interfaith work. It's not just the interfaith or just the issue at hand, really. It's like all of that, in the middle, like finding
Yeah.
the intersection, and then we're not the only ones who have found intersections of work. So
Sure.
I think that's an interesting piece of where intersectionality and interfaith work meets, right?
Yeah. And I also think that when there's different faith traditions involved, like, you're bringing your history and your story to the table. And that's why it's so important. Like, the Black church comes from a lot of civil rights and liberation, and, a Jewish church, for example, they rooted in survival of, for their diaspora. And then just, there's so many different interfaith coalitions where there are shared values across difference. And when I think about intersectionality as a whole, and even just within faith, it's okay, who's missing from the table? Who is most impacted, and who should be leading? So I think those are all questions that we should be asking as we move forward in doing more intersectional work within justice work, but also interfaith work. And it's also why I'm really excited to be bringing Rabbi Joel on from Jewish Center for Justice, because I think you'll be really impressed with everything that they are trying to do with their organization and how they're involving so many different identities and communities. And I know you're going to love this conversation, Rebecca. So we will be right back with Rabbi Joel, and so hang tight. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are so excited to be joined by Rabbi Joel Simonds. He is the founding executive director of the Jewish Center for Justice, which was founded in 2017. It covers social justice, education, and leadership development platform. And he is also the founding president of Partnership Growth for LA, which is a Black and Jewish community development corporation dedicated to fostering sustainable community wellness and cooperative development in South and West LA. Rabbi Joel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah. So this month we've been focusing a lot on interfaith work and how important it is for all religions and all faith backgrounds to show up, especially in the time that we're in right now, which I know you're very, very vocal about. And I really have always aligned with your progressive values. And I know that we've met in person and we've done events together. And so I'm really excited for people to learn about what it is that you do at the Jewish Center for Justice and to talk about Partnership Growth LA. But I want to talk a little bit about being a Jewish leader and how your identity as being a rabbi has really shaped the way that you approach justice and advocacy.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is a great question. I always grew up having a strong connection to my Jewish faith and my Jewish identity, and that was in lockstep with advocacy, right? I never knew a Judaism that didn't involve taking our tradition and bringing it into the streets and bringing it into the larger world. And I think part of that is because I had the benefit of being a Jew in America, in the time in which I grew up, in which, we had rights and we had agency and we could raise our voice without persecution of the past. There's a great, there is a great teaching, not just a Jewish teaching, a teaching in general, is that, we're not supposed to pray in a room that doesn't have a window. And why? Because the window is supposed to always allow us to see to the outside world, so that our prayers aren't just kind of housed within, but rather as we're praying, we're supposed to see the world outside and say, my prayers here should reflect the actions outside of there. So that really has been at the center of how I connected to Judaism.
Oh, I already know Rebecca is so aligned with that.
Yeah, my goodness, I'm gonna have to think more about that. That's such a beautiful way of thinking about prayer. But also this idea of like taking our faith out into the streets, like you said, and I know that's very important to Malynda and I and so many people in our community. It's like it's nice to have faith, but what are you gonna do with it? And intersectionality, like we're talking about this month and with you today, is it's often talked about in concept, right? We think about what is intersectionality. We say, yeah, that's nice. But like, how do you see it actually showing up in the work that you're doing right now?
So it's such a great question, and the way I learned both my Jewish advocacy, but advocacy in general, is that it's all about coalition. Right. I spent a number of years in Washington, D.C. And in D.C., I learned the power of coalition and the power of broad-based coalition and the power of bringing multiple communities together that didn't agree on everything, but were able to sit around the table agreeing on certain things and to be able to move the ball forward there. And, everything was not perfect, not at all, but it really reminded us that, we have to be comfortable with compromise, and we have to be comfortable in sitting around the table with sometimes not agreeing on everything, but saying, hey, we're going to come together on this one issue on environmental justice or on economic justice or on international religious freedom, right? You name the issue, we can always find a partner on the other side. And I actually think that is when some of the best laws have been created. And I think some of the best movements have been created. And unfortunately, and I'll just be honest, I think we're in a time in which it's all or nothing. And I think being in a time of all or nothing, we've lost that beauty of coalition. Because sometimes sitting around the table with someone who you're like, we don't agree on anything except for this one issue, when we start to talk, you're like, wait, actually, we agree on 2 to 3 issues. But we've lost that art. And I think that's the art not only of conversation and not only of community, but I think it's the art of coalition and it's the art of advocacy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you talk about all or nothing, I think everyone's individual identities and histories also are kind of informing what they're putting their energy into right now. And so I think we all say like, none of us are free until we're all free, but everybody's like, but I need to get free first. And it's like, no, we can actually work on collective freedom at the same time. It's fine. We're able to do that. And, in the work that we have done together, we're really big on drawing from our personal histories of bringing people together and doing a lot of this work. And even if it's not a faith-based thing, for specifically the Black community and the Jewish community have a lot of parallels, and we've talked about this a bunch. And so drawing from your own personal history as a Jewish man, and even as a rabbi, how has that influence your approach to this work and also making it a little bit more meaningful? Because I know for me, I may have grown up in the terms of even as a Black woman, a little bit more privileged, but I know the history of my people, and I want to make sure that I'm creating a world where my daughters don't even have to experience what I've experienced, and I've even experienced less than my parents. So just knowing my history has really informed a lot of my advocacy. So knowing your history as a Jewish person in this country, how does that really inform the things that you've been doing, specifically even with your organizations?
Absolutely. And it's such a great question. And I will say that it's, you mentioned it, as a Jewish man, as a Jewish white man. And I think that's important for me to say because, it used to be that I only drew upon my history and my tradition. But I think as a white man, I need to draw upon the present, right? Because that actually shapes my advocacy to say, what have been my privileges? Which rooms have I been allowed to walk into, not because of the work that I have done, because the way in which I present. And so I think that has been a huge part of my advocacy. And also, I come from a faith tradition which demands that I question. Right? Not just have questions about my faith, but I'm able to question the world. And I'm also able to question, where I am. People that don't question themselves, I'm scared of. Right? I'm scared of someone that doesn't have a little bit of imposter syndrome. I'm scared of someone that thinks they have all the answers, right? I love the fact that I come from a tradition that says, oh, there's not just an answer. Here are the many answers. Which one fits for you in this moment in time?
Yeah.
And so I think I try and bring that into the work that I do at the Jewish Center for Justice. I'm always careful not to open up the Bible, look at the Torah and say, oh, because of this one line, we now need to advocate on this bill.
Yeah.
Yes, our holy scripture is supposed to be ageless and timeless, and yet I understand that I can make an argument for a bill based on one passage, and someone from the opposite side of the aisle can make just as good of an argument for their bill based on their passage. So I'm cautious not to do that. What I try and do and say is, what is my text? What is the scripture trying to teach me? What are the values that I can incorporate here into 2026, right? They are the values of expanding rights, not taking them away. One of the stories that I often look to is the story of Amalek, right? And how Amalek did this cowardly and horrific act of attacking the Israelites from behind. And why is that important? Because who was in the back of the journey? The weak, the old, the tired, the vulnerable. So what's the lesson from Amalek? Is that we need to protect and we need to take care of and we need to make sure that the vulnerable are always at the forefront. And I think about that when we look at marches and then when we look at justice. And I'm always a little uncomfortable because it's, let's get 50,000 people to a rally and let's get the most important in the front. Let's get the religious leaders, let's get the elected officials, right? Let's get the people with the largest social media following. Let's put them in the first two rows. But the story of Amalek teaches us that as faith leaders, maybe at a rally, we should be in the back. We should be with the ones who are struggling. And so I'm thinking about that stuff as we approach advocacy and activism while connecting to our scripture.
Wow.
Yeah.
You brought in so many different intersections of thinking when you were answering that question. So I love it, the complexity. I also really appreciate the way that you talked about the scriptures because there's such a, people are so conditioned to find certainty. In some traditions, we find this like really deep certainty. And so to be able to say like the scriptures are timeless, it's the very reason that I reject most churches that have a statement of faith right out the gate, because that doesn't leave room for there to be this expansive knowing of who God is with the scriptures being timeless. Like I just so want to, I guess, highlight that piece. I think it's so important because this curiosity piece. And I do wonder, especially now we're in this place of duality being so binary in so many circumstances. And so What are some of those challenges that you're facing with some communities that may be really certain in their stance? Like, how are you able to navigate those challenges?
It's such a great question, and I'm so glad you brought up the idea of binary. Um, what I've come to believe, and this could change, there are so many amazing groups out there, but we tend to highlight the extremes.
Mm.
And what I'm really trying to do and to push myself is to ignore some of the noise of the extreme parts of social media and say, you know, I don't have to engage with those people. I don't have to engage with those groups, right? I don't have to waste like the beauty of my breath in trying to
Mm,
engage, not even in debate, but really it's an argument with people who are so
right,
fixated. Rather, let me go out to the vast majority of people that are open for dialogue and that are open for connectivity. And I actually think that is part of the problem in which we are because, nuance and complexity and compromise is not sexy, right? It's
yeah,
not wow, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the extreme is what gets the clicks and what gets the likes and what gets people, motivated or activated. But I think the real hard work of ongoing justice and of really the betterment of society is sometimes slow and it's sometimes boring, but
Yeah.
it is so meaningful. And so that
hmm
is really where I try and focus.
I talk about that all the time. Rebecca has heard me probably go off about that so much because I always say, I was like, hate spreads like wildfire and love takes a long time.
yep,
But love is what lasts. Love is what lasts,
Yes.
and that's what we're trying to lean into. But yeah, I don't like to get into the rage bait and the clickbait things. Like I'm like, okay, what are we doing? What are we building? And that brings me to my next question because you even kind of touched on it a little bit. Like for example, of putting people, certain people, in the front of like marches and rallies for the optics of things. But what does real
hmm
partnership actually look like beyond performative allyship? Because that's something that I think, especially in this time, we're struggling with seeing a lot of. It's that performance of it, it's the optics of it, but not the real work. And even like when we look at specific politicians, for example, I feel like the ones doing the most work, you don't even know their name. We don't know their
No.
name. We don't know who they're
yep,
representing. We don't know what state they're from. But if you were to do the research, you would see, oh, they've actually passed a lot of legislation. They've actually made huge differences in the cities that they're representing. But we know the public figures, we know the celebrities of politicians. So I know I added a lot there, but for you, what does real partnership look like beyond performative allyship?
I think so. That's it. I would much rather go to a closed door, boring meeting month after month in which we're actually looking at community change and bills that change than be at a press conference. Because I actually want to see what is the work that we are doing. And so one of the things that I love about what we at the Jewish Center for Justice did in working with Pastor Eddie Anderson in the creation of Partnership for Growth Los Angeles, and part of the work that I love that we're doing there, it's literally seeds in the ground, right? Literally community work that is saying, how do we make things a little better? How do we address food deserts? How do we address income inequality? Right. And so for me, what does real partnership look like? It's not pulpit sharing and it's not grass tops. It's rather grassroots. Right. And we're really good at grass tops. Right. We love grass tops because the optics of grass tops are great. Right. But it's when are the people in your pews and the people in our pews getting together when the cameras are off and there's no press statement to be made, but we're really joining hands? We're creating on paper and in life real partnership, shared capital. That I think is real partnership when we're able to create an organization together and say, we're linked. Right? We are linked by a board and we are linked by a bond and we are linked by capital. So whatever issues we have, we're going to work this out. Like we're going to work this out in a team meeting, but we're not bolting. But I think when we have like the once a year pulpit share, then it's like, You said a comment that I didn't like. I said a comment that you didn't like. We're just not going to do this again. But I think when we're linked together, like, we got to work it out.
I know that this is something that Malynda and I have talked a lot about too, about like building these relationships. And actually part of the reason that I'm where I am right now is about building relationships and finding people to be doing the work with, so that it's not just like we just show up once a year for a weekend or something, but really being in the work. And so I love how you describe that. And you did talk a little bit about your organization. So I was wondering if you can share more about the work that the Jewish Center for Justice is doing and the impacts you're hoping to make within those social issues that you talked about. So if you could just dive a little bit deeper.
Oh, my honor. So we started the Jewish Center for Justice about 8 years ago, and we really wanted to have deep impact at the local, state, and national level. And sometimes that changes based on administrations, and sometimes it changes based on appetite. So we spend a lot of time working in Sacramento, working with coalition partners. We spend a lot of time doing community education. Because I think as every day that different social media platforms expand their viewership and decrease their ability to call out lies, we have to counter that with deep education. And so whenever there is election seasons, get out the vote campaigns, understanding of community issues, we sometimes have to serve as a community validator to get out real information. Because I think there actually is a very scary organized disinformation campaign within our communities, really geared towards vulnerable communities. And so I think as community validators, we have to work with elected officials, and we have to do all that we can in every reach of social media and beyond to give positive information. Where are the polling places? What are the dates? What is this bill going to do? So that's a big part of what we do. And then to really educate and uplift the next generation. Kids that are in high school, that are in college, that are coming out of college, we want to be able to train them to be able to be advocates on behalf of their faith and within community. So those are big parts of our platform. And really, when you look at our advocacy agenda, for us, we really want to expand what it means to take on Jewish issues. Like, what is a Jewish issue? People think a Jewish issue is just Israel, or it's just fighting anti-Semitism. And yes, those are big issues. But when you look at our scripture, it is economic justice. It is environmental justice. It is women's rights. It is violence prevention, right? It is expanding rights, not taking them away. Those are Jewish issues.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think in my experience with working with the Jewish community, there's a lot of philanthropy and human rights aspects to the things that you do, and I really appreciate what Jewish Center for Justice is doing. I know that you mentioned this a little bit specifically about the vulnerable and marginalized groups, and so how do you ensure that the most impacted and vulnerable communities are really centered in your work? And also, how does Partnership Growth LA fit into that framework?
So it's a great question. So it's making sure that we are not parachuting in as, the good liberals from, the West Side. And because that often has been somewhat of the critique, especially those of us on the left. So it is about being in those relationships. It's not parachuting in. It is listening. It is understanding. It is working with community advocates. It's listening. It's truly listening. And then after listening, coming back to our communities and sometimes having the hard conversations. And so part of the work of Partnership for Growth Los Angeles is being in community, is understanding the true needs that are in community, the true needs that sometimes cannot be solved in Sacramento alone, or in DC alone, or in City Hall alone, right? It needs an all of community effort to address these things. And so it is about being in partnership for people with people who can say to you, hey, you don't live here. You haven't lived here. You haven't dealt with this on a daily basis. A number of years ago, one of the issues I was working on was predatory payday lending. And what I used to do was take a tour of a number of kind of our JCJ fellows, and I would drive them around their neighborhoods, and they would not see a payday lending place. And then we would drive them 10 miles away. And I would show them, and I would say, liquor store, payday lending, liquor store, payday lending. Because I wanted them to see, and I wanted them to understand. I love this city of Los Angeles, and it is one of the most segregated cities in this country because of our lack of public transportation, because of how big it is. And every single month, I learn more about this city. I learn how much I don't know, and I learn how segregated I really am.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how you brought up the listening and like sitting with people that have been already doing the work. There are already always people in the communities that are doing the work that needs to get done. And it's just finding them to listen, right? And then just to show up kind of alongside and to help listen to what they're talking about, what their needs are, what they've already tried. And many times they've already tried some things that haven't worked. And so I do wonder what it looks like for you and your organizations to hold multiple community needs. Like you just listed one in particular that you've gone on these tours and sort of like, look at what's happening. But I'm sure you know of so many more. And like you said, you're learning all the time about the community. So what does it look like to hold multiple community needs without losing focus of what you're trying to do?
When I figure out that answer, I'll let you know. No, in all honesty, something I've always struggled with was how we prioritize justice. It's why I can't work in a single issue organization. Because I have so many, I want to do so much, and I want to help so many people. And I think one of the biggest frustrations, and I fall trapped to this every year. And why I say this every year, because every year there's that crisis moment, and it usually happens in the summer. There's always a crisis, and then we mobilize for the crisis. But what happens when we mobilize for the crisis is that there have been crises that have been around for generations, and they always get pushed to the back burner, right? Like hunger and homelessness is one of the greatest crises of our time. But when was the last time you saw a rally or a march or a national outcry? Because we've almost just accepted this injustice is baked into the fabric of our lives. And so I'm constantly wrestling with this, right? And it's hard because, it's hard not to get judgmental, because you want to be able to harness people's passion. And sometimes people's passion emerges during national crisis, and you don't want to go after them online. You care about this, but why don't you care about that, right? But at the same time, you want to say to them, great, now that I have you, let me show you something that's been a crisis for 50 years. How are we going to help? I look at where we are in this moment in time, and the way I look at advocacy and justice through a religious lens is often, what can we do that the previous generations were unable to do? You look at the prophets. The prophets had the worst job in history. Nobody wanted to be a prophet, right? Jonah didn't want to be a prophet. Jonah was like, you know what? I'm going to get on a boat with people who probably had scurvy and gonna toss himself into the roaring sea just to avoid being a prophet.
You're right.
Yeah.
And why? Because, because in a sense, it was answering the call to say, go to these people that are sinning and tell them not to sin.
Yeah.
But if you actually look beyond that, the prophets, all they could do was wag their fingers, right? That was their job. Their job was to wag their fingers in hopes that generations later, we would have power and agency to go beyond wagging our fingers at the gate of the city. And so if we really are the descendants of prophets, we have to say to ourselves, how can we go beyond wagging our fingers? And I hate to say this, but I'm fearful that we have fallen back to wagging our fingers.
Mm.
That social media has allowed us to fall back into the time of Jeremiah and Isaiah and say, I just need to say something, get the right number of clicks and the right number of likes, and I've done my job. And rather it's, what power and agency do I have that the previous generations didn't have?
Yes.
If all I can do is, right, if all I can do is speak. If I could speak and help one person, speak and help one person. If I can speak and help one person and actually go to the state capitol and turn one vote, then I have to do that.
Yeah.
So I really look at it as in, what power do I have that the previous generations did not have? And then how can I use that for good?
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you use your platform and your voice. And as a faith leader, what role do you think other faith leaders should be playing right now in this time? I know it's a big question, but if we're being honest, people do look to faith leaders specifically to lead, right? And so I know what you're doing, but what would you like to see other faith leaders doing?
So first and foremost, I think being a faith leader is so difficult. And I always want to say I'm able to do what I do because I started my own organization with like-minded people. And I always want to say that because I have great respect and admiration for my colleagues that are in pulpits that have to pastor to a diverse group of people. And not just pastor to a diverse group of people, they have to balance budgets. They have to fundraise. They have to do life cycles. And I think it's easy sometimes for us to critique faith leaders in the pulpit that they're not doing enough. And rather than saying, what a difficult job. Like, what a difficult job, because yes, we want to make people feel uncomfortable. And yes, we want to spread the beauty of the scripture. But that person in the pews who has beliefs and views that are different than yours, you also have to make them feel comfortable enough that when they are in crisis or need a life cycle, that they will be comfortable with you as their faith leader, holding their hand at the bed of a sick loved one. And so I do not envy my colleagues that are in the pulpit.
Yeah.
And I do not think that we should demand more from our faith leaders that we're not demanding of our elected officials. In terms of issues of policy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what I want to see more of is our faith leaders being able to open the door to conversation, right? To use our houses of worship to be able to say, this is one of the only places in American society in which we are able to bring multiple generations together on a weekly basis. Think about that. Where else in American society today do we consistently bring multiple generations together?
Yeah.
And I do not think we use that enough to learn. So, we have swung so far in one direction that maybe houses of worship need to get back to the place of having beautiful conversations. Of disagreement, yes. And helping our society depoliticize issues of morality, ethics, and justice.
Amen.
And I think for me that is a big thing, right? Like, don't tell me what I'm about to preach upon is political. It was religious well before it was political.
Right.
And I think that's the conversation that I want us to have, and not just among like-minded liberal clergy. I also wanted to have it between clergy that are on the opposite side of the political spectrum. Like, what are religious issues that have turned into political issues that have now become taboo in religious institutions?
Wow.
I love that framing. Yeah, that's
I
that's
just
the
keep
set
thinking
right
there's
there, yeah.
I probably stole it from somewhere, but I just don't remember.
I still love it. It's
Well,
great. We need to be reminded of that. Yeah.
absolutely. And there's so many people I know in the TNE community specifically that are not in church anymore. I'm one of them. And hearing that, just like it, yeah, like where else are we getting multiple generations in a room at the same time? And if we could frame these conversations, these beautiful conversations, how different that might look. And I know that has felt impossible for so many people. But you're definitely getting me like to rethink what church could be. And I feel like I've been rethinking what church could be for years, but this is like, wow, how beautiful. So that gives me hope. And I am wondering what gives you hope right now, not just in interfaith work, but in your justice work.
So I am I'm a sad optimist. And why am I a sad optimist? Because I shouldn't say I'm a sad optimist. Sometimes I feel like I am just an eternal optimist. I always have hope in the future because I truly do understand the past. And it's like, I would much rather live today than in any other time prior. Right? Because, I often say, take the years 63 to 73 and think of all of the turmoil and chaos.
Yeah.
JFK assassinated, MLK assassinated, RFK assassinated, Medgar Evers, a slew of other civil rights leaders killed in their backyards and in the backwoods. That took Vietnam, a draft. For the Jewish community, the all of that, plus the war of 67, the Munich massacre of 72, the war of 73, and still reeling 25 years post-Holocaust. And so if we could get through that time, then we can get through this time.
Yeah.
And when you think about, and those were just a few things that I mentioned. Think about the various state laws that didn't allow many people to marry.
Yeah.
Not just, not just equal marriage, but also marriage between a black and a white person. So when you think about that time and this time, I would much rather live in this time with all of its problems and all of its complexities.
Yeah.
And so that really does give me hope that we're having this conversation today gives me hope. And there is still goodness out there. There really is. Yeah. It's just, we are wrapped up in an ecosystem which really does incentivize chaos and incentivize hate.
Mm-hmm.
That is short term.
I agree.
And people of faith, we play the long game.
Yeah. We have to. We have to. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you let everyone know where they can follow Jewish Center for Justice and Partnership Growth LA just to keep tabs on all of the great work that you're doing in the world?
Yes, please follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, Partnership for Growth Los Angeles, Jewish Center for Justice. We have amazing people, our amazing communications team and team that really helps everything going. I get to be the face of the operation, but we're only the way that we are because of the many people who are behind the scenes, both funding our work and doing our work. So follow us there, and let's create more coalitions.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rabbi Joel. We'll be
Thank
right back,
you.
everyone. Thank you again to Rabbi Joel for joining us. Again, we will have plenty of resources for you on TNE Connect and TNE Action so that you can know how to continue your interfaith work. Rebecca, as always, I love hosting the show with you. Any closing final words for people that are wanting to get more involved in interfaith work? Because you always have good closing words too.
I think there is just something to be said for joining in things that might be new. Like, I know sometimes it can feel outside of our comfort zones when we've been so certain. But if you're in a season of curiosity, this is a great place to explore that. All kinds of intersectional possibilities available in our space on Connect.
Yes, absolutely. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't joined TNE Connect, go to thenewevangelicals.com/connect, and we will see you next time on Advocacy Hour. Bye.
All right, bye.